In this episode, we'll take a look at the CEntrance MixerFace R4. First off, this review is from the perspective of a filmmaker, video maker, not so much from the perspective of a musician. So if you are a musician, I apologize in advance. I don't want to waste your time, just wanted to warn you now. So if you're really looking for a musician's review, you probably want to go find that somewhere else. Thanks for dropping by. So what is this thing? First of all, it is a really cool device. It's actually a miniature mixer for audio, and it can work with a camera such as a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. It can also work with cameras that have balanced XLR inputs. It can work with iOS and Android devices. You can record to those, or you can record to your Mac or PC. So it's a really, really versatile mixer with really, really high quality microphone preamplifiers, and it also has some nice outputs. Now, to call out the elephant in the room, this is not a cheap budget piece of gear. It's about $350 US, but I think there's a lot of value there, and I think you'll see that as we talk about some of its features. There is also a recording version of the same thing. Everything's the same, except it also has a micro SD recorder, which can record at 24-bit, 48 kilohertz into WAV format, and that runs $449 US. For the samples here, we're going to use the DPA 4017B shotgun microphone. Now, this is not an inexpensive microphone. This is a pro-level $1,800 shotgun microphone. The reason I'm using this microphone is I want you to be able to have a good reference point for hearing these different preamplifiers. So we're going to listen to the MixerFace R4R, we're going to listen to the Zoom H4n, the Zoom F4, and the Sound Devices 633, just so you can hear the differences between the preamplifiers. So I didn't want the microphone to be something that was going to stress the preamplifiers. Again, very good microphone. So here, hopefully, you'll be able to hear just the differences between the preamplifiers. Go get some good headphones. You're going to need them to be able to hear the differences. Here we go. Here are a few audio samples so you can hear what the different combinations sound like. In this case, we're recording with the MixerFace R4R directly into the recorder itself. And we are recording a DPA 4017B shotgun microphone into the MixerFace. We will come back to this one so you can kind of reset your ears and compare it to each of the other recorders that we're going to talk about as well. This one, of course, is being phantom powered by the MixerFace, and we have the high-pass filter turned off on both the MixerFace and the microphone, so you're getting everything. We're recording in a fairly quiet room here in the basement. Not a lot else going on at home here. 2 sound blankets, one to each side, plus one behind the camera over here. And then we have a blanket behind me, and I'm on top of a little rug here. Concrete wall in the back. Overall, this is what this sounds like. Now you're hearing the 4017B recorded into a Zoom H4n, the kind of quintessential enthusiast recorder. I don't even know if they sell this one anymore. If they do, if you can find one, it's probably about $200, maybe a little bit less. And this is probably what I would call more of a consumer grade recorder, but a lot of people use it. We have the input level set to 75 out of 100, and then we've normalized the audio to minus 23 LUFS, the European TV broadcast standard for loudness. And this is what the Zoom H4n sounds like. Also for reference, we have the high pass filter turned off on the microphone and on the recorder as well. Next up, we have the Zoom F4. Again, exact same recording circumstances here. And in this case, again, high-pass filter is turned off on both the F4 recorder and on the DPA 4017B microphone at the same time. The F4 is, I would say, kind of a prosumer leaning towards pro level recorder. Its preamplifiers provide a lot more gain than the Zoom H series. And I would say that it's much cleaner as well. They're much better preamplifiers overall. I think they sound better, and this is what they sound like. And then finally, we have the Sound Devices 633 with the DPA 4017B. Again, just for comparison, exact same situation. High-pass filters are completely turned off on both the recorder and the microphone. This, of course, is a much more professional level recorder. This recorder runs about $3,300 US for just the recorder itself. So it's definitely in a different league. In terms of the overall sound quality of the preamplifiers, I usually notice a little bit more, a smoother sound, and it has a little bit more, it seems like it has a little bit more on the low end as well. That sounds really nice and warm. So this is what that sounds like. You know, it's interesting. There's a whole I guess at some level you could debate the idea of having pristine preamplifiers that perfectly reproduce reality versus some that add sort of a flavor and something that sounds warm or nice. So there's always some debate about that. But this is the 633 and what it sounds like with the 4017B. I will let you go ahead and draw your own conclusions from that. I hope that you were able to use some high quality headphones. If not, you're probably not going to hear a difference, so please don't be angry. The differences are fairly subtle between those, so just wanted you to be able to hear the differences there. We didn't do any sort of processing, just loudness normalized each of those to minus 23 LUFS. Let's run through some of the features here. First of all, and I think very importantly, we have two XLR inputs. These are Jasmine preamplifiers, which is CEntrance's name for their boutique preamps. They're very high quality. I think they sound very good. And the input gain for each of those is an adjustment range of 55 decibels. So that's actually quite a nice range. One of the big questions that'll come up, especially I think for those that are doing interviews with sort of handheld microphones, or if you're a podcaster and you're using dynamic microphones like a Shure SM7B or perhaps an Electro Voice RE20, does this provide enough gain to drive those microphones? And the answer I think is yes. Here's a sample with the good old Shure SM58. So the important question is, can the MixerFace R4 provide enough gain for handheld mics like the Shure SM58? And the answer is yes, it can. You will have to go close to the top of the gain range, but it doesn't seem to be a problem. It seems to be a very nice, clean recording. In fact, we did a test where we recorded with the Shure SM58 to a Zoom H4n and to the MixerFace R4. In both cases, I aimed to get the peaks between minus 18 and minus 12 dB on their respective scales. It's hard on the MixerFace R4 because you don't really have a meter. But we got both of them into the same general area, and what we found was that the noise floor in the silent sections recording to the MixerFace were about 6 dB quieter or cleaner than the Zoom H4n, just to give you a reference. Now, every 3 dB is usually something that humans can pick up on. You can actually hear a difference. So a difference of 6 dB is actually fairly substantial. The R4 also has high-pass filters for each of the XLR inputs, so you can roll off some of the low frequencies if you need to do that. Here's a sample. In this case, let's demonstrate the high-pass filter on the MixerFace R4, and we are recording to the R4R at the moment. The high-pass filter, what that's useful for is typically in cases where you have a low-frequency rumble or perhaps a hum. You want to be able to cut that out and clean up the overall sound. So usually a high-pass filter is applied for dialogue at least. You generally, sometimes they go up as high as 250 hertz, but when you go that high, it's going to start affecting the sound of the dialogue. Less aggressive high-pass filters, on the other hand, generally will not affect the dialogue as much and usually are under 150 hertz. If you go, and this one is 130 hertz with 6 decibels per octave, which means that every octave you go down the frequency, it drops another 6 decibels off. So that's actually a really, really good place for a high-pass filter in my mind because it doesn't affect dialogue too much. Listen to this. So here's without the high-pass filter, and now this is with the high-pass filter applied. You could probably hear, you might be able to hear a little bit difference in my voice. I'm not hearing a whole lot in these headphones. That's a good sign to me. For me, that is a really useful high-pass filter for dialogue recordings. There is also a 3.5 millimeter stereo input. That's actually mostly useful for, I would think, podcasters when you need to have some sort of other audio feed coming into the mixer as well. So for example, I know there's an app for iPad and iPhone, and I believe it might be for Android devices as well, called Boss Jock. And it has a bunch of sound effects and things of that nature that you can include in your podcast real time while you're recording it. And you could feed that in via this 3.5 millimeter input. For musicians, of course, I think that'll be helpful as well. If you have a backing track you want to be feeding into the mixer while you're recording 2 additional tracks, you can do that through this input as well. One of the standout features on the MixerFace R4 is the headphone amplifier. Now, CEntrance actually has a history of making audiophile quality headphone amplifiers for computers and phones and things of that nature. They've carried that technology over here into the R4 as well. Now, you might think that sounds a little bit weird, like, oh, I guess your life is so awesome that you have to have audiophile quality headphone amp for your recorder. No, that's not it at all. I think what makes this important and useful is that when you are recording production sound for film or video, one of the things you need to have is an amplifier for your headphones that makes it very clear to you when you have a problem that needs to be solved. You can't be fighting with your headphone amp thinking, well, is that hiss from the headphone amp or is that a problem in my recording? You need to be able to tell if it's in your recording or not so you can fix it before you are done shooting. And that's where the MixerFace R4 really, really shines. Definitely far and above all of the Zoom H series recorders and even the Zoom F series recorders. You have 3 different outputs on the R4. One is for feeding audio to, say, for example, to a camera, whether it's a DSLR or a mirrorless camera through a 3.5mm unbalanced connection. You can set the output level to mic or line level, so you can feed it to most of those consumer-grade cameras, but also the things like the Panasonic GH5S, which has a line level input on a 3.5mm. You can do that as well, which is nice. You have 2 additional 3.5mm outputs that are actually balanced outputs. Those are primarily designed for feeding audio to monitors, so studio monitors, studio speakers, studio near-field reference monitors, whatever you want to call them. They need to have their own amplifier. Next up, let's talk about the build quality. This is another wow feature on the CEntrance MixerFace R4. This thing is solid metal build. It's really impressive. It has rubberized, nicely damped knobs or potentiometers, whatever you prefer to call them. And it also has recessed switches so that you don't actually bump them and accidentally change a setting mid-recording. You do also have a 1/4-20 tap on the bottom, so you can attach it to a friction arm or to your camera rig if you need to do that. Now, these recessed switches, again, are good because you can't accidentally bump them, but on the flip side, you do have to have some sort of tool on hand. It could be a makeshift tool, but you do have to have a tool on hand to actually change the setting. So a pen will do, a paper clip will do, things of that nature. There is no screen on the R4, which is an interesting thing we'll talk about in just a minute here. And there are just a few LEDs to indicate your levels. So you have one that indicates that you're getting signal, and a second one for each input channel that it's red that indicates that you're peaking. Now, it actually lights up a little bit before you're actually clipping, which is good. So you can use the 2 of those together to figure out how to set your levels. You bring it up until the white one is solid, indicating that you're getting a signal, and you keep going until it starts to peak just a little bit, and then you back off just a touch. Now, that's not the same as having a multi-segment meter to know exactly where your levels are at, so that can be a little challenging if you're using it as standalone, but your camera or your phone or your PC can actually have multi-segment meters, so in those cases you can make it work. Then there are just a couple of additional LEDs. There are 3 segments that indicate obviously that the unit is on, but also the battery status at the same time. And then if you get the recording version, there's an additional LED that can be either green, red, or off. It's red when you're recording, green when you're playing back, and off when you're doing neither of those. So overall, I really, really love the build quality of this. I love actually that it doesn't have a screen and you don't have menus. You just have buttons and switches and knobs. So that makes it really easy to use. It makes it kind of more of an analog feel, and it makes it really nice to operate. Now, the nice thing about not having a screen is also that the battery lasts a lot longer, and we'll come back and talk about the battery a little bit more in just a minute. But there are some things you're going to be wondering, well, how do I get it to do such and such? What are the button combinations I have to do? Now, there is a quick start guide on the back of the unit itself, so that's always going to be with you when you have the MixerFace R4. But there are also these 2 laminated cards that come with it. I would keep those in your bag just so you have them for reference in case you need to remember how to format a card if you're using the recording version or things of that nature. And incidentally, the recording version records to micro SD cards. The MixerFace R4 and R4R both come with an inbuilt lithium polymer battery that is said to last up to 8 hours. In my testing, when we turned phantom power on to phantom power a Rode NTG2 shotgun microphone, in our test, we got 6 hours and 51 minutes of battery time. So that's actually really, really good. No external batteries. I was able to just power the unit with its own inbuilt battery, phantom powering a microphone for almost 7 hours. Wow, that's really quite good, especially for something that's so small and so convenient. I can't think of another single device that can last that long and record to WAV format at the same time. Now, the Zoom H4n, for example, does have a stamina mode that will last that long, but it only records to MP3 at a much lower quality. So this is, I think, unprecedented in terms of at least the devices that I've used so far. Now, if that battery life is not long enough for you, you can also use an external USB battery bank to power the R4 for a longer period of time. And the unit comes with a 1-year warranty. Let's quickly talk about a couple of cons. I have touched on some of these already. Number 1, there is no multi-segment meter, so you just have the 2 LEDs per input channel, 1 saying you're getting a signal, 2 saying you're peaking. That's not ideal, but it's also not a deal breaker in my mind. So again, if you're going to be recording to your phone or to a camera that has a meter or to your computer, those are all going to have meters. So you're going to have a full resolution and be able to see exactly where you're at. But even with just the 2 LEDs, I found that if I'm using it here, for example, as a standalone recorder, it works pretty well. And it's actually not too much trouble to get those levels set with those 2 LEDs. And number two, as we talked about before, those recessed switches. It's a mixed blessing. It's really nice because you can't bump them and turn them or switch them in the middle of a recording. On the downside, you do have to have some sort of tool to be able to change them. It's not a huge deal. Some people get really annoyed by that, so I thought we should probably mention it. There are a couple of other things on the Pro side that I wanted to kind of highlight in a little bit more detail. Number one, there is, in addition to the monitor level, there's also these additional knobs that allow you to choose whether you're getting the sound or the monitoring sound from the direct inputs in real time or from USB if you're connected, say, for example, to a phone or a computer. How much of the signal are you getting from the computer as it's playing back something, and how much you're getting from the direct inputs? Now, that's going to be especially important in cases where you're doing some sort of overdubbing. That's especially important for musicians where they may have a recording of a drum track, for example, and then come back and lay down the bass track, and then come back and lay down the guitar track, and then come back and lay down the vocals, and so on and so forth. It's really important for that so you can hear what's already recorded plus what you are recording at the same time. But it can also be useful for filmmakers if you're doing dialogue replacements. So being able to play something back and record at the same time and being able to hear both of them, you can choose exactly a mix of how much of each of those you're hearing in the headphones. That is a feature you don't find on a lot of these other consumer recorders. I want to talk a little bit more about the high-pass filter. The high-pass filter is an analog high-pass filter. That is significant. In a lot of the other consumer-grade recorders, they actually implement those as digital high-pass filters. So those are applied late in the signal chain. That is to say, after the audio comes in from the microphone into the pre-amplifier, it gets amplified, then it gets converted to digital, and then a high-pass filter is applied in a lot of these other devices. In the MixerFace R4, however, that high-pass filter is actually applied before it even goes and gets amplified through the pre-amplifier. And the reason that's significant is that then you're getting rid of all that noise before you do any of the amplification or any of the analog to digital conversion. You get a much cleaner recording that way. That's important and that is significant. Now, for filmmakers, I need to answer some questions that I think are very obvious that filmmakers would ask. And number one is, why wouldn't I just go buy a Zoom H-series recorders, an H4n, Pro, H5, and H6? Well, there are a few things. Here are a few things that the MixerFace R4 can do that the Zoom H-series don't do. Number one is preamp quality. Now, remember, as we did the dynamic microphone test, we also did a comparison there, and we found that the MixerFace R4R was able to record from the same exact microphone, Shure SM58. The silent portions were 6 decibels quieter than they were on the Zoom H4n. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that actually is quite a bit of difference. And what that means in practical terms is that when you're editing your audio for your film or video, that you're going to have a lot less trouble with self-noise, with the hiss that is produced by audio recording systems. So that's actually fairly significant. The headphone amplifier quality, again, as I talked about before, that is a big difference on a Zoom H4n, a Zoom H6, even a Zoom F4 and an F8. The headphone amplifier is not nearly as nice and clear and clean and detailed as you get in something like the CEntrance MixerFace R4. The MixerFace R4 also has independent outputs. So, for example, on the H4n Pro, if you wanted to send audio to your camera, you can do that using what is a kind of a shared headphone line-out jack, but that's the only jack you get. On the MixerFace, you get a separate jack for your headphones, you get a separate output 3.5mm, plus you get 2 additional balanced 3.5mm outputs. So you can output to your camera and monitor with your headphones at the same time. You can also even send additional feeds to studio monitors at the exact same time. So that's actually really nice and gives you some more flexibility. I think the build quality is unquestionably better on the CEntrance MixerFace R4. And in the rough and tumble world of production audio for film and video, that's important. As I mentioned before, the analog high-pass filters on the CEntrance R4, you have those. On the Zoom H-series, you do not have those. And actually on the Zoom F-series, you don't even have those. Those are actually all implemented as digital high-pass filters, so some of the damage that's done to audio can already be done by the time that high-pass filter is applied in the Zoom recorders. Not so in the MixerFace R4. It actually takes care of that before the audio even gets amplified. And again, you have this direct versus USB monitoring mix dial. That's something you don't have now. This is only going to be important for filmmakers generally if you're going to be doing dialogue replacement, but it's there if you need it. And then let's talk about the Zoom F4 versus the MixerFace R4R. So the MixerFace R4R is about $450. I've seen the Zoom F4 sell for as little as $450. I think it usually runs a little bit more than that, but what's the big difference between them? And why wouldn't you just want to buy an F4 instead? Well, few things. Number one is size. the MixerFace R4 is significantly smaller. So if you're going to be rigging it up on your camera, that makes a difference. And if it's important for you to have something that's small, compact, keeping the rig as light as possible, then the MixerFace R4 probably makes more sense. Assuming, of course, that you only need 2 inputs. Another thing is that built-in lithium polymer battery in the MixerFace R4. That can make a big difference as well. Again, if you're trying to keep the kit as small as possible. I love the Zoom F4. The problem with the Zoom F4 is that if you are going to be doing any sort of longer shoot that can't be powered by the AA batteries, which there are 8 of them that you put in the F4, then you're going to either have to have an external battery or you're going to need to switch batteries more often. And that is a little bit cumbersome, especially if you have to add an external battery. That increases the size even more and it increases the weight. So there are some other considerations there. Again, as I mentioned before, the headphone amplifier quality is superior on the MixerFace R4. And then again, that direct versus USB monitoring mix dial, if you are going to be doing dialogue replacement, that's a nice to have. So overall, there's a look at the CEntrance MixerFace R4. Hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. And if you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that, and we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.